All right, well, hello everyone. Hello to everyone that's watching this in person and everyone who is watching this online. I'd like to welcome you to the second talk in our little celebration of almost Charles Darwin's birthday. He will be 213 this Saturday, if he was still knocking about. And I'd like to give a warm welcome to Dr. Ted Stankowich, who will be diving into the wonderful ways that organisms have developed mechanisms to avoid predation in all the various forms that that's arisen. And so without much further ado, please welcome Dr. Ted Stankowich.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ted Stankowich. I'm at Cal State Long Beach, and I'm honored to be here as your speaker, as one of your speakers for Darwin Day. At my you said it was his 213th birthday. I recall when I was for his 200th birthday, I was at UMass Amherst, and they had a guy come in who, I can't remember who it was, but he gave a talk about Darwin's life and actually sculpted a bust of Darwin out of clay as he gave his talk. There was no PowerPoint, anything, but he gave a full talk from memory and had a mound of clay at the start of it, and by the end of the entire talk, he had a clay bust of Charles Darwin. It was the most amazing thing I've ever seen in a classroom. So, but I'm honored to be here for you all. So, without further ado, I will get started and share my screen. So I hope you all can see that. Yeah, so my lab, we're at Cal State Long Beach, and I've been here for about almost 10 years now, and we study the evolution of mammalian defenses and anti-predator behavior in black and white coloration in mammals. We do a wide variety of things. Today I'll focus mainly on defenses and coloration in mammals, both behaviorally and evolutionarily. But we also do a lot of other stuff, like with urban ecology. So we have a long camera transect where we look at how urbanization influences mammalian ecology, occupancy, activity, and we also do stuff with the evolution of weaponry too. So you'll get just a snippet of our work in this talk, but hopefully you'll find it enjoyable. So. Obviously, mammals have evolved a wide variety of ways of defending themselves, and I'm going to focus mainly on the morphological portions, although we've looked at behavioral too. So things like spines, armor, noxious sprays. You have echidnas. These are the monotremes with the spikes all over their body, like spiky footballs. They live in Australia, so they're one of the earliest mammal groups to evolve. You have tenrecs and hedgehogs, which also have spines. They can roll up in a ball completely, and they evolve these traits independently of one another. You have two groups of porcupines. On the top, you have old world porcupines that are larger and have larger, thicker quills. That they are not barbed, but they are longer and thicker. Whereas on the bottom, you see a new world porcupine. This is a prehensile tailed porcupine. And these have smaller quills, but they have barbed tips and they are detachable. So they come off in the enemy much easier and leave you with a hand or a face filled with quills. I would much rather handle an old world porcupine than the new world. Those little barbed tips are horrible to have to hang on to. And these defenses are quite effective. Here's a old world porcupine defending itself against a group of lions. I don't know if this animal survived or not, but I like to think that it did. But it will turn around and keep the rump spines facing those animals as best it can, because those are the most effective. These quills are really big and thick. Some are as thick or a little bit thicker than a pencil in diameter. They are striated black and white. They have a ridge that runs down the side that you can only feel, and it sort of acts like a knife blade. And they can actually kill predators. So there are a number of anecdotes or they found predators that have died from porcupine quills. In fact, there was an account I found of a leopard who was found with a porcupine quill through its heart and probably died instantly upon being punctured through the chest with this quill. So these things mean business, and they are quite effective for defending the animal against a larger predator like that. And then you have the armor plated animals. So you have the armadillos, which have a bony carapace of osteoderms. Only one species can totally roll into a ball, and that's the three-banded armadillo, which you see here. The rest can roll up in various degrees, but they have this bony carapace on top of their body that has it's also somewhat pliable as well. Then you have the pangolins on the right-hand side that have a shield of keratinized scales. There's no bone in those scales, and they are both ground and tree pangolins. But it's like a great suit of armor on these things, and they can roll up into a ball entirely and this defense is really effective. Here's again lions trying to get a meal, but not being successful at it. They're trying to eat this pangolin here and probably not able to break through that big ball of armored plates. So these defenses have evolved a number of times independently throughout mammalian evolution. You can see at least 7 times here on this figure. I've also included the skunks with their stinky carnivores with their noxious sprays, which we'll talk a lot more about later on. But generally speaking, there's a clear anti-predator function to these traits, right? They help them avoid being killed by predators. But if they're so good, why doesn't everything have them? So one of the main questions we ask in my lab is what ecological conditions favored the evolution of specialized morphological defenses in the first place? If they're so effective at saving your life, why doesn't everyone have these defenses? What sort of factors make it more favorable to spend the energy evolving these traits? So we want to take a step back and think about probably the things that make the thing that's most important is predation risk. Those that live in a way that makes you more at risk of predation are going to have stronger selection to defend themselves in a more advanced way like this. One of the ways that we've looked at is exposure in your habitat. And exposure is a combination of your size and how open your habitat is. So you can be a larger or a medium-sized animal, live in a dense rainforest and not be exposed at all. You can be very cryptic, or you can be sort of medium small and live in an open desert and be very exposed. So it's really a function of these two things. But in general, with size, as mammals evolve to become larger in body size, you get to be easier for predators to see. So as you go from like a rat size to a squirrel or a rabbit size, you become more visible in your habitat and also a more desirable prey choice because you got more meat on the bones and you get more benefit out of eating that animal. Once you pass about the 10 kilogram point though, it becomes harder for more species of predators to capture you. So in fact, only 15% of mammalian carnivores and 1% of bird of prey species can eat mammals that are larger than 10 kilograms. So past that point, you tend to size out of most predators and lose predation risk, okay? And finally, in terms of habitat openness, obviously, the more open the habitat you're in, the easier it is for predators to see you. So if you're in a rainforest, harder to see compared to a desert, which is very easy to see. So all these things sort of come together, and what we hypothesized was there's this zone of this danger zone where selection really does favor specialized defenses because you're at really high risk of exposure to predators in your habitat by way of your size and the habitats you live in. So what we did was we crudely scored defensive abilities or morphological defenses, plates, spines, and sprays on a scale from 0 to 50. And we gave them, if you use a furry mammal, you got a score of 0. But anything above that, you had some level of spines or armor. And we did a comparative analysis from over 3,500 species of mammal. And so this is the same graph just with data points overlaid. And you can see that the black points, the black cloud are undefended species. They just have fur. The warmer colors with the larger markers are those that have actual defenses. And so you can see that they all do indeed cluster in this zone of intermediate body size open habitat types. So overall, what we saw was that large and intermediate sized insectivores that live in open habitats are more likely to have these robust defenses. And one of the questions I often get is, well, look at yes, there's this cloud of red points there, red and orange points there, but there's a lot of other black points there too. What's going on with those? Why are these animals not defending themselves with armor, like you say, when they're in this danger zone? Well, it turns out if you look at those black points there in the same sort of cloud, they really most of them fall into two categories. They're either other carnivores that have sharp claws and sharp teeth and are aggressive and can probably defend themselves pretty well with violence. They're probably pretty pugnacious. Or they are hopping species like rabbits and kangaroos. They are saltatorial. And things that hop can have higher maximum running speeds relative to their body size than other species that run on four limbs. So the most of the things that live in this zone, the vast majority of the species, have either morphological defenses, are hoppers, or are just nasty carnivores that can bite and scratch and claw. So this really is a great zone to understand what favors these strong defenses. Having these defenses probably has consequences. So we work on skunks in my lab and behaviorally, and I've noticed that my skunks aren't the brightest animals in the world. I know that armadillos aren't very smart. I know that echidnas aren't very smart. And so we got to thinking, well, maybe these armored or defended animals aren't the smartest animals in the world. Maybe they have smaller brain sizes and have lost relative brain size as a way to pay for having to grow and carry around these suits of armor. So we gathered a data set on relative brain sizes, and the way we measure that is through what's called Encephalization Quotient. And Encephalization Quotient is essentially the actual size of the brain relative to the brain size predicted by body mass. So this is a graph showing a variety of mammal species with their brain size, their brain weight versus their body weight. And obviously larger species, larger groups have larger brains just by scaling. So you can draw a regression line, a correlation line through this cloud of points. And so anytime you land on that line, so let's say you weigh 1 kilogram, and you land on that line, with a brain weight on that black line, that is your predicted body weight based on your mass. But if you have a brain weight above the line, that means that your brain is larger than what's predicted for your body mass. And if you're below the line, that means your brain weight is smaller than predicted. So what EQ is, that it's a fancy allometric term that sort of says that if you fall on that line, you have an EQ of 1, an encephalization quotient of 1. Anything above that line, you have an EQ greater than 1, below the line, less than 1. Humans have the highest EQ of all mammals. We're in the 7s, but most things fall sort of around, around between 0 and 2 are where most mammals will fall. So there was already a large data set out there of EQs and brain weights available for a lot of mammal species. We supplemented that by going to museums and collecting brain sizes of a lot of defended species that hadn't been collected before. And so this is the work of my former undergraduate, Ashley Romero, who's now doing a PhD at Missouri. And we compared it to our defensive score, and lo and behold, we did find that as mammals evolve more robust defenses, they show a correlated decrease in relative brain size. So the more defended you are, the smaller relative brain size you actually have. And this really falls into two different hypotheses at two different levels of analysis. So brain tissue, body armor, and spines are all energetically expensive to build. In fact, brain tissue is one of the two most energetically expensive tissues in the body, along with your gut. So approximately, species that invest more energy in body armor and sprays can't afford to build a large, expensive brain. There's some energetic trade-off here where they lose brain size because they have invested more energy in their armor. At the ultimate level, though, species with strong defenses can probably afford to be less intelligent or cognitively advanced with smaller brains, because they don't have to worry about predators all around them. They don't have to be as vigilant for predators as other species do. So they don't need as large of brains. So we were exploring these trends in lots of other mammal groups individually. We already published a paper on tenrecs, and we found the same trends in tenrecs, with more exposed species having larger spines, and those with spines having smaller brains. My current undergrad student, Mariana Leyva, is finishing up her honors thesis on porcupine quills, looking at these trends in porcupines. And so we've got measurements of quills for most porcupines and other hystricognath rodents, and looking at how these traits evolve as well. We're looking at it in echidnas. I've actually been able to go to Australia and do behavioral work on echidnas in the field. Did this a couple of years ago with on my sabbatical. Went to Dryandra woodlands in Southwest Australia, and echidnas are just the most fun animals to work on, you can imagine. They little balls of spikes that walk around in these open forests, and essentially you drive along these dirt roads, and you spot one off the side of the road and hop out of the car. And they're not fast, obviously, although they're faster than you might think. You can lose them real quick. But you just sort of walk up to them. Once you get up to them, they just roll into a ball and will stay put. You can pick them right up with thick leather gloves. The spines are very, very sharp. Even if you're wearing thick leather gloves, it will poke through occasionally. You'll get little tips of spines in your fingers. But what we would do is you could attach transmitters on them, so radio transmitters to find them later on, just with epoxy. And we put unique marks on them with just plain old nail polish, and then let them go. And so I measured their flight initiation distances and how that correlates with their performance, their strength, their willingness to uncurl once released, a variety of other factors. We're still working with that data, so we don't have results for you, but we have worked on these animals in the wild to see how their escape behavior correlates with other aspects of their biology. But going back to what I was talking about before, we've also been working on this with their museum skins too, and measuring their spines and correlating it with the variation in their spines with certain ecological changes in habitat, climate, that kind of thing. We have done this. We've started doing this with armadillos and pangolins as well. So here's my former grad student, Caitlin Stapp. We went to the Smithsonian a few years ago and CT scanned a bunch of armadillo and pangolin skins. You can see these study skins we wrap them in bubble wrap and sort of then saran wrap around them into a bundle, put them through a medical grade CT scanner, the kind you would have as a human. And you can get really great resolution images of their bodies. This is an isosurface of an animal. And what Caitlin did was she measured the thickness of their armor across different parts of their body, the head, all over their carapace, and on their tail. Came up with an overall composite measure of armor thickness and looked at how that evolved with a variety of other factors. And one of the most important things she found was that indeed, as predator bite force increases, so as each dot here is an individual species, as the maximum bite force of a predator that species experiences increases, the average armor thickness increases as well. So thicker armor species have more dangerous predators. So that made a lot of sense. There was also some other correlations there as well, but I won't be getting into that. And I have another student, Alex, who's doing the same thing with pangolins right now. And we want to go back to museums all over the country and gather more data to ask similar questions about the factors that influence armor, as well as is there sort of a suite of correlated traits that might influence, that might all evolve together, like limb morphology, diet, basal metabolic rate, EQ. So once you go down this path of evolving armor, do you evolve a suite of other traits that is predictable? So we're working on that right now. One of the major things we focus on in my lab are the noxious spraying carnivores. And most studies of anti-predator defenses and warning coloration, or aposematism, are done with invertebrate and frog prey. These are easily kept in the lab, and you can make models of them and then give them to birds in the lab or in the wild and see how they attack them based on their color patterns. And usually it's studied from one side. The birds have to actually bite or consume the animal in order to taste the toxin in the skin. Normally it's just people working with birds in the lab and they give them dead prey to eat. But rarely do people study aposematism and defenses of more active defenses. So these are all passive, right? The predator has to eat the animal or try to consume it or taste it in order to know it's defended. But there are a number of species out there that can spray or actively defend itself prior to being contacted. So this is a bombardier beetle that can spray a hot, noxious liquid out of its rear end. And skunks, obviously, you all know, can spray noxious anal secretions if they're predators. This is a spotted skunk doing a cool handstand. So here, they can actually spray at the predators before being contacted and try to be even safer than having to be tasted first. And so here's where skunks and other noxious carnivores have evolved. That's order Carnivora. That's where they fall in with other mammals. But a wide variety of carnivore species are actually can spray noxious sprays. So of all the animals on this image here, only one of them is a skunk. That's this animal over here. This is a spotted skunk, which you saw before. They can do a handstand. They're direct relatives of the striped skunks that you have in Wisconsin. We also have stink badgers, which are up here. They are also in the skunk family, but more basal in the tree. And they can spray just as well as skunks can. They have this little white patch on their head, that they live in Southeast Asia. Then you have a whole bunch of other mustelids that can spray as well. So this is a marbled polecat. This is a grison, African striped weasel, zorilla. All these things are mustelids, little weasel-like, polecat-like things. And the zorilla is really the skunk of Africa. And it evolved both its spray and its coloration totally independently of skunks. They have a black body with 4 white stripes. They have noxious anal secretions that can aim right at the predator just as well as a skunk can. But their secretions are totally different chemically than a skunk's. They have a different structure entirely. So we know that they evolve separately. Then you have things like, went back instead. We have ferret badgers can spray very well. Then you have things that just can sort of emit foul odors when they're harassed, like genets and the civets and mongooses. So they vary a bit more. But the point here is that warning, coloration, and noxious spray defenses have evolved independently in a number of different carnivore groups. So a while back, we went through the literature and found anecdotal tales of as many carnivore species as we could. We're able to quantify or identify the ability to which they can spray their anal glands in defense. And so on this evolutionary tree of the carnivores, I've sort of labeled the common names on the outsides for everyone. If the dot is white, it means that they use their anal glands not for defense, but for communication, like your dog might or your cat might. If it's yellow, it means they can simply emit a foul odor if they're harassed. If it's orange, it means that they can squirt their secretions out in a stream, but not aim them. If it's red, they can actually aim those secretions, those sprays at a predator in a more advanced way, like a skunk. And so you can see that skunks have really advanced sprays, and those polecats do. And here's the ferret badgers over here. But then you have a lot of weasels and raccoon-like animals and badgers that can be stinky, can defend themselves with odor, as well as these genets and the civets and the mongooses over here. You really don't see it at all in the felids, or very little in the bears and the canines. And that's because those are larger carnivores. Those are your large carnivore species, and they don't need to defend themselves with sprays because they're bigger and they don't have as many predators. So we asked, why evolve spray defenses in the first place? Let's look at who the predators are. There are large carnivore mammals that are very sensitive to odors and also more likely to be nocturnal. Then there's predatory birds like your raptors and your owls. Birds tend to be less sensitive to odors. They tend to be more anosmic and aren't bothered by noxious odors, and more likely to be diurnal, other than the owls. So our hypothesis was that species that have evolved noxious weaponry are under relatively heavier potential predation risk from large carnivores, but not birds of prey, because you want your defense to match your predator. So we came up with a measure of potential predation risk, not based on studies of mortality, but on theoretically, if you were a furry little yummy ball of meat on the ground, living in a certain area, what is the likelihood that you're going to get eaten by predators in your area? So we said for every predator-prey dyad, birds and mammals, we asked how much of the range of each prey species is overlapped by each predator species. And then we corrected those percentages by, do you live in the same habitat type? So are you going to encounter each other in the same place? Are you active at the same time of day? Are you going to be active? Are you going to ever encounter each other in time? Or is one of you nocturnal, the other diurnal? Does the predator want to eat you? How much of their diet is made up of mammals? And finally, based on the largest prey item that predator can take down, what's the probability that they can eat a prey animal of the size of the prey of interest here? We put all these data together and came up with this potential predation risk score for every predator, for every prey, and came up with total predation risk scores for each prey species, and broke it down by avian risk and mammal risk. And here this graph shows it's a plot. Every dot here is a carnivore species. It's the nighttime mammal risk versus daytime avian risk. And what you see here in the colors of those dots are scored by the ability to use their anal glands and defense, and also their sociality. And so those that have really high nighttime mammalian risk are the ones that have all the noxious sprays, that they can direct their spray very well and can squirt their secretions. So when your predators are primarily carnivores that are sensitive to odors, you want to be a sprayer. When your predators are primarily birds and not carnivores, birds flying overhead in the daytime, it pays to be social. It pays to live in larger social groups where you have lots of eyes in the sky. The highly social species are the ones that have high avian risk. So what we think is happening here is that predation risk actually is responsible for both the evolution of noxious weaponry as well as the extreme social behavior you see in things like meerkats and mongooses. So really interesting results here from this study of predation risk. We do a lot of behavioral studies, though, of predators and prey. We've tended to focus on skunks and coyotes as our predator and prey of interest. And studying them in dyads is really unusual. Normally, labs just study the predator side or they just study the prey side. But we want to ask a number of questions of both parties and sort of integrate them together. So first, how do defended prey assess risk from different predators? Are defended prey do they perceive less risk in their habitat than non-defended prey? Do predators have an innate avoidance of these prey? How much individual variation is there, and how much do they have to learn about them in order to avoid them in the future? And what is the role of body pattern, structure, and contrast in predator learning and avoidance of these prey? And how much are predators able to generalize from the standard prey pattern type to some variants that might be have a different pattern or structure? We'll talk about all these questions here in the remainder of the talk. So like I said, we focus on striped skunks. They are nocturnal mammalian carnivores that live in exposed habitats. This video is of an actual skunk-coyote interaction in the field that we filmed and on an infrared camera. It's really hard to film at night with these things. That's why it's all sort of blurry. But you can see that the skunk, standard defensive posture, up on its toes, arching the back to show that black and white body pattern, tail erect, fluffed out to make itself look large. It's going to do little foot stomps and foot scrapes and small little handstands here to tell the coyote, stay away, stay away, stay away. Here it will actually chase the coyote around. Skunks really rule the land out there. There's not much that's going to want to kill them other than owls. And the coyote wants nothing to do with that skunk. He knows that the skunk will spray him. So he's keeping his distance. He just wants the food in the grass that's been scattered around. So coyotes know to not attack these animals. My former grad student, Kim Fisher, studied the question of how do skunks assess the risk posed by mammal and avian predators. She went out at night, and we have this field site where there's tons and tons of skunks, and did playbacks of calls of great horned owls, which are the primary predator of skunks in the field, because owls can fly down silently at night, attack from above, and as I said before, don't really care if they get sprayed in the face because they don't smell it very well. So skunks don't like owls. They pose a major risk. The coyotes, on the other hand, as you saw, don't pose a major risk. So with coyotes, they tend to just defend themselves and then run away if the coyote does not do anything. But here's what they did towards owls. Here's a playback of an owl call. And so note the body posture and the behavior of the skunk. Whoop. Sorry about that. Tail down, run away. If you're a skunk, you do not want to be caught out in the open when there's an owl flying around. So they run to cover in that case. Tail goes down, they run to cover. And they are more vigilant and fled most frequently to owl sounds compared to coyote sounds. We've been following this up with visual models. We built our coyote robot that we can drive around and harass skunks. We call it Obi-Wan Coyote. And we're working on building an owl model as well that can glide down and attack skunks as well. Here's the coyote robot that can drive around and has infrared and thermal cameras on the front. Here it is approaching a skunk, and this skunk just runs away. But typically what you'll see in my current master's student, Hannah Rabbitoy, finishing up this work. And so here the robot's being driven in from the right. You're going to see the same sort of defensive reactions with the skunk as we saw before. Little mini headstands, foot scraping, tail up, back arched. And when the coyote does not seem to be getting the hint and running and moving away, the skunk will eventually turn and run. There it goes. One last little handstand there and a runaway. The skunks have never sprayed our model. They've only just done this behavior and then run. But I imagine if we really pinned them up and trapped them up against a wall where they had no option, they would spray our model, but we just haven't observed it yet. So Hannah's been working on her master's thesis and is finishing that up now, but looking at how the appearance of the model can influence their flight behavior. We've done a lot of work with trapping of skunks as well, looking at their anti-predator defenses and their noxious secretions. So we will trap them in live traps, put them under sedation, do measurements, markings, ear tags, and then we'll collect their anal gland secretions. So here's my former grad student, Vicky, measuring the skunk, and I'll talk about her work in just a minute. But as you know, skunks have two anal glands on the side of their rectum or their sphincter, much larger than the anal glands of your dog and cat. And what happens is when they spray, there's two little papillae that are inside the sphincter, and they will evert outside, spray, and then go back in. And this is my favorite part of the talk because I get to show you this GIF of a skunk spraying in high res, high and slow speed. So this usually grosses everyone out, and usually I get to see the grossed out expressions on everyone's faces in the room, but I can't see your faces, so it's not as fun for me as it usually is. But yeah, so you can see those papillae firing out the spray there, that yellow noxious fluid, and I'll let it play over and over and over again until you get squirmy and want to turn it off. But so we're able to extract that, and with a syringe, and you can see it varies in color, so Vicky's question that she asked was, how does the noxious spray vary between populations? And so one of our hypotheses is that as predation risk decreases in an area, the selection that favors strong defenses and bold coloration will relax, and those traits will become more variable. And so she tested their secretions in two populations. One in California, where we have coyotes and mountain lions, and one in Texas, where there are no coyotes or mountain lions for at least the last 20 years or so. And so she did gas chromatography on their secretions. Where is that not advancing? There we go. And so we can identify three major sulfurous compounds in their secretions that make up the stinky stuff. So there's a butane thiol, a methyl butane thiol, and a thioacetate. All have sulfur in them. This is what a jar of this stuff looks like, or a vial of it. This is just our pool of it that we have on hand for other studies, but makes for a great stink bomb if we were ever attacked. I have a great stink bomb to throw at an attacker. It would just ruin the building forever, I think. But she was able to come up with a overall total amount of these thiols in the oil, and compared them across California and Texas. And what you see is that while mean levels of the chemicals did not change, the variance did change. In Texas, where there were no predators or very few predators, was much more variable than those in California. And so I'll talk more about that in just a minute. But one of the things people talk about with me is that, oh, my dog gets sprayed by skunk all the time. Tomato juice does not work. It's a myth. It does not get skunk oil out of your dog's fur. What will do it is this mixture of peroxide, baking soda, and dish soap. Do not use water. Water actually activates the thioacetate, makes it smell worse. And tomato juice just makes you smell tomato juice and not the skunk, even though the smell is still there. So this will actually get rid of the odor altogether. It will oxidize those thiols and eliminate the odor entirely. So I have this up on my website. You can also search for this recipe online. But if you have a dog that gets sprayed a lot, or there's skunks around, I would keep these things on hand and just mix it up. You can't pre-mix it and keep it in this state. You have to mix it up fresh each time. So we see that the odors become more variable when predation risk goes down. My other student, Hannah, looked at their patterns as well. She quantified stripe length and width across over 700 skins of skunks from all over the country. And you can see they are quite a bit variable. Some only have this little white patch on their head with an all black body. They can have long pencil thin stripes. Those stripes can get quite thick to being almost a full white cape. Most of the animals we have around here look like this, but some areas have quite variable populations. In fact, this picture here is of one litter of fetal kits from Illinois that you can see there's huge variation in the stripes in just that one litter. So skunks can be quite variable in their patterns depending on where we go. They are not variable where we live here in California. They all pretty much look like this right here. But in some areas, they have a huge range of patterns. And so she looked at how predation risk influences the pattern total white and contrast border on these skins and how variable they were. So we mapped every skin onto a map of the country with potential predation risk variation across there as well. And so each one had their own level of risk based on what predators lived around there. And she measured how white the back was and how much contrasting border there was. So how much white-black border there was on the animal, and looked at those two scores plus the variation in those as well. And what she found was that in terms of overall whiteness index, there was no overall change in overall whiteness due to mammalian risk or avian risks. So they were fairly constant across risk scores. But contrast borders did increase with greater risk from both groups. So as risk increases, there are more contrasting lines on the back of that animal. But even more interesting to us is that as risk increased for both mammals and birds, the variances declined. So just like we saw with the skunk oil, when risk is higher, there's greater natural selection to have consistent body patterns. So predators learn to recognize those patterns as dangerous. You don't want predators making mistakes. And the best way for predators not to make the mistakes is if everyone looks the same. So when there's lots of predators, there's strong selection favoring consistent coats. When there's not strong risk, though, there's less selection favoring that, and that can drift away, and those coats can become more variable in those areas. So really cool effects of relaxed selection on coats and sprays. Finally, we've looked at how coyotes learn about these patterns and sprays. So do they have an innate phobia of warning colors, or do they need to learn about them? Former grad student Caitlin Fay went to Utah, where there's a predator research facility with 100 captive coyotes, mostly bred or wild caught. They live in pens, and you can manipulate them and do experiments on them behaviorally. So she first conditioned them to eat off of these brown furry plates. This is faux fur. She would put their food right on top of the plate, put 2 of those plates in their pen, and over 5 or 10 days, they got conditioned to eat off of those brown furry plates. And then she would, once they were regularly eating off of the plates, she would swap one of them out with a black and white skunk model. But this skunk model had a remote control sprayer on it that would spray skunk oil in their face if they attacked it. And so she was able to train them to not attack skunks. And she gave them 3 trials with the skunk model. And once they started to avoid those models, she then would test them on variant models to see how they were able to generalize their avoidance across different model types. So here's a video of a coyote, and it's attacking a black and white model for the first time. You'll hear a click. That's where it gets sprayed. Yeah, so it just got sprayed in the face. Very mild spray, diluted, not total potency, but this animal never attacked a skunk again. One spray, it learned how to do it. So some of them, one trial, never again attacked a skunk model. Others got sprayed 9 times in the face and kept going back. So there's huge variation here in their willingness to attack these models. But overall, these are survival models. She found that there was longer latencies to attack black and white models compared to the brown models, but with huge individual rates of learning to avoid the black and whites. There's certainly innate phobias there. You can see how hesitant the animal was to attack the black and white model, but and a couple animals never even attacked the black and white models after learning on the brown ones. They just knew innately not to go near them. But others went back all the time. My more recent student, Kathy, followed this up with models that varied in contrast and pattern to see how pattern influences their learning ability and contrast influences it as well. She ended up having to do her work using trail cameras on wild coyotes here in California, and found that pattern didn't matter. They were equally avoiding all of these black and white models, regardless of what the pattern was. But they were much more likely to avoid and be hesitant of the black and white compared to black and gray and black on black. So we're looking at trying to break down the pattern and the contrast to see how it impacts predator avoidance from the skunk's point of view. Finally, to finish up, having had nothing to do with skunks, we've also looked at black and white coloration in zebras and pandas, asking, why do zebras have stripes? Why are pandas black and white? There are 7 equid species. 3 of them are zebras. So these 4 up here, Kayang, onager, the horse, and the wild ass, all lack stripes. The wild ass has leg stripes. Then you have 3 zebra species, the mountain zebra, the grevies, and these 3 down here are all part of the same species, but they just vary a lot in their pattern. The quagga is extinct. And so we compared how which hypothesis for zebra stripes best predicted striping patterns. And we looked at sociality, camouflage, predator presence, heat, and biting fly activity. And what we found indeed was that biting flies are the best predictors of stripes. So in areas where biting flies are most active, these are small parasitic flies that will suck blood and pass on disease. In areas where tabanite activity was highest, you see the red up here, these species that had high activities of flies had the most intense leg stripes. all through here. Whereas those that had low fly activity out through here had no stripes at all. And so the others also correlated well with stripes, but biting flies were the best predictor of the evolution of stripes in the zebras, and what's in subsequent experimentation on in the field has shown that what's happening here is that the stripe patterns are actually disrupting the ability of the compound eyes of the flies to actually land on them. They sort of hover around and then almost bounce off the stripes because they can't judge where the animal actually is. So really cool stuff happening with zebra stripes. When you answer a question like this, get a lot of attention for it. And I was about a week after this paper came out, they made a joke about it on Saturday Night Live, and I pretty much I fell off the couch. Can't really beat that in terms of outreach ability, but a dumb joke, but not at our expense. So I call that a victory. So really, people really take notice of this when you answer a major question. So the next thing we did was try to answer the question, why are giant pandas black and white? The other major charismatic black and white species among mammals. And here, because there's only one panda species, we had to break it down into body parts and ask, among all the carnivores, why do carnivores have dark legs? Why do carnivores have light or white bodies and faces? And then piece the puzzle back together. Essentially, what we found was that the white of the panda is helpful for crypsis against snowy backgrounds in their habitat. The black legs are good for crypsis in shady forested environments with dappled light. Those two things combine to break up their body shape in a disruptive way. So it's disruptive coloration. The eye spots and ears are probably more used in communication. But overall, pandas are unique among the bears because they do not hibernate or go through shallow hibernation like other bears do. They're active year round and they have to eat bamboo. They can't store a lot of food reserves like other bears can. So they have to be tried to avoid being seen in both snowy and forested environments. So having this black and white pattern is a good compromise there. I can talk more about each of those if you want me to in the Q&A or afterwards, but with that, I thank you and I'm happy to take your questions, and please give us a follow on social media up above. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, muted, he can hear you.